Hello everyone, thanks for turning out on a dark wet evening and welcome to this relaunch of Leeds Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. I'm Dave Webb, Chair of Yorkshire CND. In the past, Leeds has been a major centre for anti-nuclear protest, and Leeds City Council became one of the first to declare itself a nuclear-free local authority. At this crucial time when nuclear arsenals around the world are being modernised and states are increasing spending on the military and preparing for war, it's more important than ever that we stand together to oppose the apocalyptic danger that nuclear weapons represent. We have some great speakers here tonight: Sophie Bolt, the General Secretary of National CND, and Richard Burgon, MP for Leeds East since 2015, who was Shadow Secretary of State for Justice and Shadow Lord Chancellor in the Corbyn Shadow Cabinet from 2016 to 2020. He's on his way here now after attending an important vote in Parliament, so he'll be a little bit late, but he should be here soon. We'll also be hearing a bit about 2 US military bases in Yorkshire. But first, let me hand over to Sophie Bolt from CND.
Thank you. It's really lovely to see you all, and it's just really great that Leeds CND is having a relaunch. Really important. You know, we all know how serious the situation is. You know how critical the threats are in terms of the nuclear weapons and the war drive that's going on. It just feels like every day there's some new, very serious development and threat of war. So it's really important that we're building our movement. I mean, people will know that sort of last week the hands of the doomsday clock were moved closer to midnight, 85 seconds to midnight. That's just another indication of how how rapidly the sort of threats to humanity and to our planet are accelerating. And we know that this is due to the threat of nuclear weapons, war, and also, of course, climate breakdown. And today sees the end of the New START Treaty, which is this critical arms control agreement between the US and Russia that have between them over 10,000 nuclear weapons, basically 90% of the world's nukes. And today that treaty has expired. This is kind of sort of very serious, as I say, given the huge number of nuclear weapons between those two countries, but also given the threats that we're facing in terms of increasing risk of nuclear weapons being used. We've seen certainly over last year and going into this year this kind of continued nuclear saber rattling by Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin over the Ukraine war, horrific conflict which catastrophically there seems to be sort of no end in sight. But now, of course, we have Trump massively sort of accelerating this sort of aggressive military and economic coercion across the world that, for those people who've read it, it's sort of laid out absolutely explicitly in the US National Security Strategy that was published the beginning of December, where that kind of lays out that the Trump administration is about reasserting its military and economic dominance over the world, and how it's going to do that is by reasserting its right to exploit the resources of all those countries and regions that it views should be subordinated to it. So it talks about the Western Hemisphere being our hemisphere, and basically, that Latin America should be subordinated to the US. And it kind of refers to the Monroe Doctrine, which is something from the kind of the 18th century. So this was when, previously you'd had sort of European colonialism dominating Latin America, and the US kind of taking over from Europe. And so Trump calls this his Trump's corollary, i.e., we're just sort of we're just continuing this sort of historic, tradition of totally oppressing, Latin America. And so, of course, we've seen the very sort of serious military attack on Venezuela and the illegal kidnapping of Maduro. And I think what's different now about the US administration, whilst the sort of the foreign policy, the sort of military strategy, the nuclear strategy is not that different, it's how it's being presented by the Trump administration. So now the gloves are off. So this is no longer couched in terms of concerns around democracy, human rights, or humanitarian intervention. It's absolutely clear, Trump says it's absolutely clear that this is about US interests. This is all about America, the America First agenda. So as I say, in relation to Venezuela, Trump made it absolutely clear that this is about getting control of the country's, the world's biggest oil reserves, and that's what's been going on there. But of course, we've also seen the extraordinary threats to Greenland by Trump, and Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark, which is a NATO member state. So you had Trump, threatening to invade a NATO state, and this has had a really, really sort of profound impact, where you now have a situation where even US allies, members of NATO, are at risk of military attack or economic coercion. And so what we're seeing is a real kind of flux in terms of global alliances, and certainly huge pressure being placed on US allies. And that's definitely the case when it comes to Britain. So people, I'm sure, were sort of following those kind of extraordinary events where, as I say, Trump had sort of threatened Greenland and Britain in order to try and placate Trump. Was saying, okay, we'll send in some troops to, militarily provide some kind of security against the supposed threats from China and Russia. And in response, Trump said, I'm going to put tariffs on all those countries that sent troops into Greenland. So a really kind of extraordinary situation where one of the US, key allies, most long-term allies, been involved in sort of nuclear and military agreements since, 1958, was basically sort of being threatened by the US publicly. So as I say, this is having a really, really significant impact politically, globally, and certainly here in Britain. And what we've seen emerging is, a real challenging of the US special relationship, the UK special relationship with the US. So this whole thing around Britain's military and nuclear subordination to the US. So we've seen yet another wave of challenges to Britain's nuclear dependence on the US, and how this is driving British foreign policy and economic policy. So why isn't Starmer standing up to Trump? It's because we're totally dependent on the US for our nuclear weapon system, which of course is absolutely correct. I'm sure all people here know that we lease the Trident missiles that launch the nuclear warheads from our nuclear submarines. We lease those from the US. And of course, now with Britain buying these US F-35A nuclear-capable fighter jets, which launch US nuclear bombs, this is only going to tie Britain even closer to the US. So this is creating a real kind of crisis for Starmer on top of all the other crises. And as I say, as well as challenging the Britain's kind of nuclear subordination to the US, we've seen the challenge from the Green Party leader, Zach Polanski, this really, really excellent response to the threats to Greenland, kind of calling out Starmer, basically saying, well, if the US is going to invade Greenland, then we should close all of our US bases. And at some point we will see a big map that shows all the US bases. I mean, we've got probably about 16 to 18 US bases declassified or bought out. Some more research showing actually it's probably more than that, but it's really, really, it just shows the kind of the military dominance of the US in Britain. So he's kind of, he kind of called out saying we should kind of close these military bases, and polling showed that 55% of the population supported that. So we're seeing, as I say, like really, really significant shift going on here, but also, more and more people are totally understanding that Trump's actions are making the world far more dangerous, and that Britain's alliance with the US is putting us all at much greater risk from nuclear weapons and war. And certainly, nationally CND sort of turned around this. We have had a kind of really strong social media campaign just showing how, Britain is completely subordinated to the US, both in terms of its nuclear weapons, but also showing, a map of the sort of the US bases. So pointing out RAF Fylingdales and Menwith Hill that we're going to be talking about shortly, but also RAF Lakenheath, where we now have very, very strong evidence that US nuclear weapons are now stationed there. So, and I think it's absolutely critical that we really build the protests calling for these bases to be shut down. We know that the British government doesn't want people to know about this military relationship with the US. They don't want people to understand or see the dangers that are involved in this military alliance. So it's absolutely critical that we are shining that spotlight. So as I say, we're basically seeing there's a much greater opportunity and a much bigger space to actually challenge Britain's nuclear weapons. And with the NATO alliance, really being kind of politically split now, it puts greater pressure on the British government's decision to commit, tens of billions of pounds to buy these nuclear-capable jets, for an alliance that's, totally at odds with itself. So, I think it's really important that we seize this opportunity to really push for, this decision to be reversed. And we have more space to be arguing for alternatives to this war drive and the nuclear expansion. And I think that we've got to be really arguing for an independent foreign policy. I think we will, we're kind of pushing an open door. An independent foreign policy that is focusing instead on the real security issues we face, like climate breakdown and social deprivation, because it's absolutely clear that Trump's war drive and our government's complete support for that is only making all of these crises that we face much worse. I mean, you can't bomb your way out of the climate crisis. And in fact, the Joint Intelligence Committee, people might have seen this, they have produced a report which says that climate breakdown is the key security threat that we face in this country, in terms of massive shortages, in terms of food shortages and that kind of thing. And that report has been suppressed by the government because it doesn't fit in with their war readiness agenda. So, and of course their war readiness agenda is about whipping up threats of imminent, invasion and attack, and it's all to justify these horrific levels of military spending, hundreds of billions of pounds. And the way they argue this is, on the one hand, these threats, but on the other it's to say this is how we're going to kickstart the economy. This is how we're going to get more jobs. This is how we're going to we're going to bring prosperity to the whole country. But of course this is totally false. There's been critical research on this, including in this is my plug for the Alternative Defence Review. CND's, really proud to have supported this. That's been led by the trade union movement, particularly the RMT. But that's showing that the huge amounts of money being poured into the defence industry creates a tiny, tiny fraction of the jobs compared to the health sector, transport and education. And this is, because of a number of things, but including the fact that most of the money is actually going into the pockets of the shareholders of these big arms companies. But also it's not even staying in the country, it's going out of the country, because most of this money is also going to US arms companies like Lockheed Martin, who make the F-35s. And so, yet again, this is part of the America First agenda. Trump wants Britain and other NATO states to be funding the US arms industry. And by funneling, billions into the military, this is taking away from these other sectors, as I say, like health, education and transport. These are sectors that are absolutely critical for helping to actually grow our economy in a sustainable way that will keep us safe, healthy, and actually sort of have a secure future. So it's absolutely critical that we build those links with trade unions, climate environmental movements and the anti-cuts groups. Absolutely critical. So just to conclude, reasons to be hopeful. As I say, I think that the world is shifting and there's huge opportunities to really push for an alternative to war and nuclear weapons. But also the government is coming under massive pressure, particularly in relation to its failure to improve people's living standards and its attempt to impose further cuts. So we've seen that there was a vote in Parliament today after the government committed to lift the cap on child benefit, which is very, very significant. So in April that will be gone. And also, we know that the government was sort of forced to kind of reverse its decision around not extending winter fuel allowance universally. So that's gone. But also we know that because of public pressure to improve living standards, Starmer has been forced to delay the Defence Investment Plan. Now this is the costed plan for all the kind of military expenditure that came out of the Strategic Defence Review, which was published last year, which was a kind of the wish list for all the horrific things that the Starmer government wanted to do. Not just in terms of nuclear expansionism, but the huge increase in military spending. So Starmer has not been able to. Has not been prepared, should I say, to get that published because of his concerns around these costs. So basically they can't get away with the huge levels of spending that they want to do because it's so unpopular. So that shows that public pressure is really working, and we have to kind of hold on to that. So that's why I think, again, it's so important that we build the links with the trade union movement. And again, this is something I think which is we can be hopeful about and have a bit more positivity, because I'm sure people will have followed that last year at the Trade Union Congress there was quite a significant vote overturning pretty terrible policy that had been set in 2022, which was saying we need to have a massive increase in military spending, we need a 30-year pipeline for nuclear projects. That was overturned last year on a wages not weapons policy. So basically saying we need to be prioritising spending money on public services and not on weapons of war. And the reason why that passed is because trade union leaderships were coming under huge pressure from the rank and file trade union movement, but also because of the huge influence of the Palestine movement, that has been so dynamic and has really cut to the heart of this government's complicity in genocide. So trade union leaders were not prepared to vote for supporting military spending that is basically just profiting from genocide. So a really important, significant victory, and we have to build on it. And then finally, I just wanted to say about young people. Young people completely understand the scale of the threat in relation to nuclear weapons. Polling has showed this, that from that age group, they have a much higher understanding of how serious the threat is. And of course they would, it's their future at stake. They are very active, they are very organised, they have secured really big wins on divestment from arms companies and universities, especially in relation to companies that are profiting from Israel's genocide. They are massively challenging militarism in education in terms of bringing in ethical careers policies, things like that. They are really working really hard. And I think given the agenda of this government, which is to try and further militarise education, to turn education into a conveyor belt really for the war economy, it's absolutely critical that we support those young people and their campaignings. And also, we can be inspired. There's huge strike action taking place in Germany, where you've got young people and students who are opposing conscription. And given the threats that we have here, we should really kind of be inspired by what's going on there. So, I think, as I say, there's a huge amount that we can do here. There's big opportunities in relation to these global struggles. We need to keep up the pressure on the government. We need to reach out to new people who are really seized of these issues and want to hear the alternatives. And we have the solutions. And I think that was my final point, is we totally have the solutions. The crises that we're facing, because they are getting worse and worse, it becomes clearer and clearer to people how interconnected they are. And so, linking up with the climate movement, linking up with the anti-austerity movement, we can be much stronger, and we're sort of speaking with one voice. Thanks.
Right, thank you very much, Sophie.
Sorry?
Thanks a lot. You can see the map of the bases here behind you. These are the US bases in the UK. And in fact, there was an article in Declassified today which actually increases the number of US presence anyway and influence in the UK. And in particular on here you can see two particular bases, Fylingdales and Menwith Hill. And I'd just like to take a few minutes to just say a few words about those, because though they are extremely important bases in the UK for the US military. And I'm going to start with Fylingdales. That's the one here in North Yorkshire on the way to Whitby. You may have seen it on the Yorkshire moors. This huge pyramid, and you can see on the right there, top right. This is what it used to look like, 3 huge golf balls, 3 radomes. With inside those radomes there were these really big radar antenna, and that opened in 1963, and it was replaced by this pyramid that we see now in 1992. So now you can see, this is the view you get from the road on the way to Whitby. Huge pyramid. It's called a solid-state phased array radar. It just means that it's electronic, right? Whereas before the radar, it was a traditional radar with a dish. Now there are hundreds of radar aerials on each of the 3 faces of that pyramid, and they can stretch a beam. It will go round in 360 degrees and orientate upwards, so it can reach out to something like 3,000 miles into space and detect. Originally it was there to detect missiles coming from on the way to the United States. So that's what it looks like, closer up. And this is what it was part of. It was part of the United States Ballistic Missile Early Warning System. You can see the other radars involved in this as well. And it's basically to give the United States a warning of a missile attack, in the case of Fylingdales, from, well, it was originally from Russia across the North Pole towards the United States. It's also the UK kind of bills it as giving us a 3-minute warning of a nuclear attack. It gives the United States something like 20 minutes warning. So, you know, what you can do in 3 minutes, I don't know. What you can do in 20 minutes, I don't know. Panic, yeah.
Panic, yeah.
So that if we ever told, of course, in the first place. So it's also now part of Donald Trump's Space Force. You probably remember, or maybe you don't, in 2019 Donald Trump launched the Space Force. He said there's going to be a lot of things happening in space because space is the world's newest warfighting domain. And Mark Esper, who was US Secretary of Defense at that time, said maintaining American dominance in that domain is now the mission of the United States Space Force. And what's happened since then, or even before then, actually, is that space and satellite systems have become integral. They're a really vital part of the US military, and in fact of most militaries, most advanced militaries, call it advanced, in the world today, including the UK. They can't do without satellites. They need them for communications, for reconnaissance, and all kinds of other things. And Fylingdales is part of that, in the way that I'll show now. This is the structure of basically Space Force, US Space Force. You can see it's a huge enterprise, and you can also see from what this is from the Space Force website. So you can see it's now called Space Warfighting Architecture. They're talking now about fighting wars in space, and Fylingdales is a part of this, because these are some of the sections. They're so-called Delta operations. Fylingdales is in this area here, missile warning, but it's also in another sector which does surveillance and reconnaissance, because what Fylingdales does is it links into the US systems for making sure that they understand everything that's going on in the space domain. It's called Space Domain Awareness. And what they need then is to know everything that's going on. This is Space Force Delta 2, Space Domain Awareness. And Fylingdales contributes to that because its radar is so kind of powerful that it can detect smaller objects in space. So it looks for satellites, it tracks satellites, and even space debris. If you go to Fylingdales' website, or if you hear them speak about Fylingdales, they'll tell you how important it is, because it enables satellites to move out. They can track debris coming around orbiting the Earth, and it enables them to move satellites out of the way of the debris. That's true, it does do that, but it also does a lot of other things. So, for example, it can target satellites. If you have an anti-satellite system ready to knock satellites out. And because satellites are so important to the military, not just America, but also China, Russia, then there are those kind of things being developed at the moment. And just also to say that these two documents, you can get them from the internet. This shows the intentions of the United States Space Force to take warfighting into space. This document, Space Warfighting, was issued, I think, last year, or maybe the year before, a framework for planners. It demonstrates how the importance of space dominance is to the United States. They need to dominate space, deny the use of space to other countries, and so on. And the Space Force Vector is a kind of strategy for achieving that dominance and that superiority. And of course, also now we have this other thing, this Golden Dome idea of Donald Trump to set up a sort of an umbrella through which no missiles can penetrate. And of course we've had this before. It was a strategic defence initiative of, who was that, the Reagan initially, and that didn't work, couldn't work. And this one can't work either. It's just impossible to do that. but there's a lot of money going into some of the developments, and a lot of the people who are gaining from this, of course, are the huge multinational corporations, aerospace corporations, who are contributing to all kinds of things like satellite systems, ground-based missile systems, all those kind of things. They're making billions from it, and they're the ones that are pushing this thing. So, I think that's enough for me about flying bells. The next one to talk about is Menwith Hill, and we've got Martin here from the Menwith Hill Accountability Campaign, who's going to say a few words about Menwith Hill. Just look at the presentation.
Well, good evening. I know some of you who are sitting there, so I'm Martin Schweiger, and if you're looking for me on a Tuesday night, come up to Menwith Hill between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock. During the summer we're there till 7:30, but in the winter it's cold and yucky, so we back up at 7 o'clock. I'm also a member of the Society of Friends or Quakers, who have a long tradition of saying, actually, people matter. There's something valuable about each and every individual, and the whole idea about developing weapon systems to kill and destroy is not really what we're into. So, can we go on to the next one? Basically, I should, with the first picture, just to, you can see, if you haven't found it, Menwith Hill, if you're on the A59 going between Harrogate and Skipton, on the north side, you'll see all these golf balls, and that's one part of Menwith Hill. There's a lot of Menwith Hill you can't see from the road, and I think there's quite a lot of stuff underground, as well as a very large data centre in the middle of it. So what happens at Menwith Hill? It's a communications base, but for a communications base, it's remarkable. It has no letterbox, and you can't hand letters in. And if you do write a letter to the officer commanding, registered or recorded, he doesn't reply. So in terms of some of the very basic communications, it's a little bit behind the time. It's mislabeled. It's called RAF Menwith Hill. There is one part-time RAF officer there, Anthony Bassant, quite hard to get hold of, and he doesn't always reply to letters. But okay, there's a part-time officer. He used to be an Aquatiri in Cyprus, and I think he was transferred to Menwith as part of his pre-retirement training, where he does have an important job. There's a site of special scientific interest with some unusual orchids in one corner, and I think he does visit that every week. So, the orchids are being cared for by the RAF. It's just everything else that's happening at Menwith rather misses out. The people who are running it is the United States National Security Agency and their National Reconnaissance Organization. So a long-time campaigner about Menwith Hill is somebody called Lindis Percy, who some of you will remember photographs of her climbing the gates of Buckingham Palace with an upside-down stars and stripes. Lindis is no longer quite as well as she was, but she's still very aware and concerned that she thinks Menwith should close, and I think some of us are totally in harmony with that. It collects and processes data from orbiting satellites, and a lot of what's in those big golf balls are obviously antennae of different sorts, picking up from different satellites. There's also linked into a collection of cables that span around the world, part of the Five Eyes project, and so there's a massive amount of data coming in. If you have, and I don't know how many people here have one of these, if you have a phone, even a landline, they're almost certainly automatically downloading anything you say, any of your emails or other actions for which you're using a digital system, they can pick it up. I'm pretty sure they can also hack into any system they particularly wish to do so. So if you're trying to recruit some expert hackers, probably some of the guys at Menwith would be able to help. The information is passed. So welcome. There are loads of seats, even at the front.
Yeah, we'll go.
Wherever you're comfortable. The information is passed, I think, mostly to Fort Lauderdale, almost instantaneously, but there is data processing also taking part at Menwith, where they may do some sorting or selection. In addition to the people from the National Security Agency and National Reconnaissance Office, there also are some people from GCHQ. And there's some interesting agreements about Americans are not really allowed to spy on Americans. So they use GCHQ to do that. GCHQ isn't meant to spy on UK citizens, but the Americans can. So there's a certain amount of interesting movements. Let's try the next one. Yeah, so what happens? The big action is surveillance. And there's a massive amount of a lot of that data is recorded automatically, but it certainly includes military information. So when you hear about drones hitting somebody in faraway places, a lot of the targeting. Menwith Hill doesn't have a gun, apart from those which are carried by the MOD police as they wander around, but it's really a big gun site. It will identify targets in real time, and so when there are drone strikes, I assume most of you are well aware that drones are meant to be smart, intelligent weapons. They just happen to kill a lot of collateral damage, so they're not that smart. And it depends on your estimates, whether do they only get 10 people as collateral damage, 27, or up to 60? It depends whose accounts you're reading. But the Bureau of Investigative Journalists certainly puts it well over 30. So not terribly intelligent. Diplomatic surveillance. Some of you will remember Angela Merkel's telephone that was released, what they picked up from her, but undoubtedly any other people of high profile that is diplomatic surveillance. There's an incredible amount of commercial surveillance. If you have a company producing something and you're stupid enough to put the details of your new invention online or on your own computer systems, but it's hacked into, that may well be sold elsewhere. And we did see quite well described what they were doing with European Airbus and selling the information on to Boeing. The whole surveillance business really kicked off with the Pinkerton Agency in the United States, where a lot of that was about spying on the workforce and working out who were the labor troublemakers, who was promoting a strike. So a lot of what's picked up and paid for is really about trade unions and other activists. And of course there's political information. And you may say, well, how much data are they getting? Well, just think about the news over the last few days. There's some guy called Mandelson, and they have acknowledged that they have at least 3 million bits of data about him. 3 million about one individual. And they probably have substantial amounts about everybody who's sitting in this room and everybody else. Most of it's harvested automatically. But it does raise lots of questions about who decides what happens to that data, who can look at it, who's it shared with, how's it interpreted, what's done with it. So lots of issues. Should we go on to why we should be concerned, which is, I think that's the next one. I mean, the big issue, Menwith Hill is not accountable for what it does. Not to the UK government, and probably there are very few people in the United States who actually know what's happening. We have heard again today, it had some publicity for the first time in ages, the Intelligence and Security Committee. And you could spend a little bit of time on Google or whatever. The Intelligence and Security Committee, when they last had something about Menwith Hill, it was all redacted. So there were 2 pages of Menwith Hill, but it was just black, black, black. So I think effectively, certainly it isn't accountable to the local community. It isn't openly accountable to Parliament. So who decides what use is made of the data and who sees it? The commanding officer. We are not meant to know anything about the commanding officer, but we were told he is male. So we have a gender release for who is the commanding officer. We also know that he's a civilian, because as a civilian, he's much less accountable than he would be if he was in uniform. So there's a deliberate reason to use a civilian contractor as the person who supposedly calls the shots on the base. This meeting organised by CND has something to do with nuclear weapons. And if you're trying to identify a target in Yorkshire, almost certainly Menwith is a number 1 target. How much the people who live in the locality of Harrogate know or realise or appreciate that, but it's undoubtedly, it is a target. There are also little things about costs for the people, the American citizens there. We heard lots of stuff about all these migrants coming in and, they're using our health service, they're using our education. Well, there's a number of questions about who's actually paying for the health care, who's paying for the education of the children of the people who are there, and interesting ambiguity about who pays the policing cost, or the civilian policing cost of what's going on at Menwith. Yeah. Just to say, there is a website for the Menwith Hill Accountability Campaign. Put into Google, it'll come up with it, but https themac.uk. We also, in collaboration with CND, produced a report, Menwith Hill in 3D, domes, data and drone strikes. And if you're looking for something to read tonight, I'd recommend you can download it from the Menwith Hill Accountability Campaign website. Do have a good look at it. It goes into quite a lot of detail. So, what action is appropriate? First one is to learn about surveillance and its uses and abuses. And I think data or surveillance data can be abused big time and can do a lot of harm. We need to raise awareness with the public and politicians. As I said earlier, if you're bored on a Tuesday night or you just want some fresh air, come up 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, a small group of us standing outside the gates with posters and banners. It's a peaceful presence, but we're there, and a couple of people who are here periodically come up and join us. And if you're wondering what to do on the 250th anniversary of independence from America, or American Declaration of Independence, come up to Menwith and the Kettlesing Millennium Village Hall, and we hope we'll have a few interesting speakers and refreshments, a chance to meet other peace groups. So do think about the 4th of July in the afternoon. Good place to come. I think we've had a number of successful 4th of July events, and I hope this year we'll do something really well. And the last slide should be an invitation, which I'll stand clear of. On the 24th, or Tuesday the 24th of February, so not that long to wait, there are a very dynamic peace group who some of you will have come across, World Beyond War. They're calling for global days of action to call for the closure of all foreign military bases. Well worth going to their website, dataclosebases.org. A lot of information, and you begin to understand why there's a problem. So do come up. We'll be only there from 6 to 7, but we want to make a big presence at the gate to say it's a problem. Just one minor point about Sophie's slides. You showed, I said 18 bases, and then I think you said there were a few more. Well Beyond War, I think there are 21 American bases in the UK. And don't forget, I mean, my wife is Irish, so I can't forget Ireland. Shannon isn't meant to exist as an American base, but it is. So the call to close all foreign bases, I have hopefully gone on record of saying, as and when the Americans decide to leave Menwith, or the American military decide to leave Menwith, I'm happy to go as a volunteer and pack their cases, and I invite you all to join me.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you.
I'll certainly join you. We'll just go back to this. So Richard is with us now. Thank you. Where is he? There. Okay. Thanks very much for coming, Richard.
My pleasure.
So really, over to you. The theme of the meeting, as you know, is Donald Trump and what can we do about him and nuclear weapons. So,
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, and good to see some familiar faces in the audience. Welcome me back home to Leeds from London. I've just come straight from Parliament, where there was a backbench business debate on the question of genocide and Gaza. And it was a very well attended debate. Unfortunately, it was constrained by time, but it's good to see the debate, which was secured by the SNP MP Brendan O'Hara, with the support of MPs from different parties. So I was one of the signatories to the application for the debate. So it's important that we don't forget, and how can we, about the genocide in Gaza, that we don't forget about what the government of Israel is doing to the people of Palestine, because with everything that's going on in the world, and the fact that the so-called ceasefire, which doesn't seem like much of a ceasefire in practice because people are still being killed day after day after day, has taken the images and taken the news about what's going on in Gaza and indeed the West Bank out of the news headlines to too great an extent. So it's really important that we keep talking about Gaza and we keep talking about Palestine. And that's why I was so pleased that last weekend, with the support, of course, of CND, Stop the War and other organisations, there was a huge demonstration again in London, a huge demonstration for justice for Palestine. And my message on this is simple. We need sanctions on Israel of sufficient scale. The government's shown that it knows how to bring sanctions. It rightly brought a lot of sanctions on Russia for its unlawful invasion of Ukraine. Why can't it do the same in relation to Israel? Now, we know why, of course, is because international law is not applied equally, because it's a case that we don't have a foreign policy that is pursued through the prism of international law, human rights and conflict resolution. Instead, we have an international policy that is pursued through the prism of geopolitical alliances. And that is what is becoming unpicked, because the aggressive role of the United States of America has been clear to many of us, the aggressive role of the governments of the United States of America under various different presidents of the United States, whether that be Democrat or Republican. One of the first differences in relation to President Donald Trump, of course, was the fact that he's quite open about the USA's role in the world. He doesn't provide the plausible deniability. He doesn't give the excuses for intervention. He says exactly what it's about. So in Venezuela, he says it's about oil. And then, of course, he has produced this new so-called national security document. It's 29 pages long. I think people should read it. I think every member of Parliament should read it, and every member of the peace movement should definitely read it too. Why? Because it shows you exactly what his plan is in there. So what he's doing now, it's not the case which some even fairly progressive MPs think. It's not the case that he wakes up one morning and decides to say or do something that is admittedly crazy. It's set out in there. In the so-called National Security Plan, it talks about carving up the world into different spheres of influence. It talks about treating Latin America as, again, the United States' own backyard. It talks about, which should worry everybody, pushing support for the far right across Europe, because he wants far right governments in Europe to support him in his worldview and to support him in the pursuit of his imperial ambitions. And so that does present actually this national security plan, not just a change in tone, not just a openness about the nature of American foreign policy. It actually represents a change in American foreign policy. It's a new form of gangster politics, and it's something that should concern us all. And it was earlier last month that we saw the illegal, appalling, horrific military attack on Venezuela, and now the kidnapping of the head of state, President Nicolas Maduro, the killing of around 100 people, I believe, including Venezuelans, but also 32 Cubans who were there. And what other country on earth would get away without clear condemnation from the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom with flying into another sovereign country, bombing the place and kidnapping the president, and then taking the president to put him on trial in a show trial in the United States, where some of the things he's accused of include having possession of a machine gun. So now is it the case that the United States can be trying to prosecute the head of state from another country for having a weapon in a different country where the laws may be different? And of course, heads of state generally are protected by people with weapons, as is the case in virtually every country on earth. And then Trump was very clear about that. There's the military attack on Venezuela. Then there was a threat to Mexico and to Colombia and Cuba, and that's been taken further now in that there's been an intensification of the blockade against Cuba, a blockade, of course, that has existed for nearly 67 years, but has been intensified, with other countries, other sovereign countries, warned that if they provide oil to Cuba, then they will face huge tariffs. And that's an absolute abuse. At the same time, we see the so-called peace board that Donald Trump has set up in relation to Gaza, an appalling development. And it seems to me that what he's trying to do, perhaps, is set up a kind of alternative to the United Nations, where different people that he handpicks maybe have to pay money to be on this peace board. And I think, obviously we should be looking at modernising and further democratising the United Nations, but instead Donald Trump is trying to provide his reactionary alternative, perhaps, to the United Nations. And so I've argued for many years, but I think the argument is now being well received by more people, that we need a more independent foreign policy. We need an independent foreign policy. We can't have a foreign policy where we're defined by being the junior partner to the United States, by and large, in whatever intervention or position they take around the world. We do need an independent foreign policy based not on following the United States by and large, but based on international law, human rights, peace and conflict resolution. And so we need an independent path. Now, what an independent foreign policy means is another matter, of course, because you could have a reactionary independent foreign policy. So I think we need to make the argument for an independent foreign policy that we need a big national discussion about what that independent foreign policy would be. Because you could have an independent foreign policy to really make life a misery for people in the global south, for example, couldn't you? And I'm sure that if this meeting was to decide on what an independent foreign policy would look like, it looked like a very good independent foreign policy. We need to have that discussion more widely. But there is quite rightly, and not just amongst people who consider themselves to be on the left, there is a justified widespread suspicion in this country of getting involved in foreign wars, and that's completely correct. And I think that the Prime Minister sometimes mistakes what the public think of the role that he wants to play in the world. And so a multipolar world is now more of a reality than ever. It's an opportunity that Britain must seize. Global power is becoming more diverse. The world's economic core is moving from the US as new economic centres emerge. Now, the EU remains roughly 3 times bigger as a trade partner for us than the United States of America is. Countries such as Brazil, India, China, and countries across Africa are playing a growing role in shaping the global economy and shaping international relations. Now, I would argue that UK foreign policy must reflect this changing world, engaging with all major centres of economic power on the basis of mutual respect. Now, of course, that includes the United States of America, but not in a subservient way. We should work with all of these countries for the benefit of our own citizens and the wider world, rather than trying to tie ourselves still to a weakening power with a volatile leader who is not a force for good, Donald Trump, in the world. And it's really become clear, hasn't it, to a lot of people who maybe never thought they would draw this conclusion, when you see Trump's threats in relation to Greenland as well, that the so-called special relationship won't protect us. We've heard earlier about US military bases in our country, and of course there's a role that the UK plays in that military assistance, both actual and potential. But as well, a lot of the time, the key role of the UK has been to provide political cover for the foreign policy of the United States of America. And that's one reason, by the way, that the establishment was so keen on preventing Labour coming to power when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. Now, as a little aside, and I was a member of the Shadow Cabinet then, as a little aside, it wasn't our excellent policies on schools, hospitals and wages and living standards that got the establishment annoyed to that level of organisation and fight back, because although those things are important and they might not have liked them, these things can be reversed and these things can be to an extent tolerated. What I think they really didn't want was an anti-war Prime Minister of our country, because as a country, we have, a permanent place in the UN Security Council with the power of veto, and I know that the vetoes can be ignored, but all the weight that a veto brings. And let's imagine that the appalling war on Gaza, the genocide that has taken place, had taken place whilst there was a Labour government that had won in 2017 or 2019 with Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. Now, the role that our country would have played on the international stage in relation to that would have been completely different. And that political cover that the United States often seeks from the United Kingdom wouldn't have been there. And in a sense, the reality of global politics may have been unmasked in a very clear way. So that's why you had a situation where the establishment was so keen to prevent us coming to power at that time. So we can't rely on the special relationship to protect us. Loyalty has not brought influence. The only serious response to Trump is to stand up to him, not to roll over. Like all bullies, I would argue, Trump will keep coming back if not challenged. We shouldn't indulge him, we shouldn't appease him, we should develop a strategy that responds to the reality of the plan he's pursuing as outlined in his national security document that I referred to earlier. He responds to strength, he responds to clarity, but he also represents serious domestic risks. Trade deals that open up public services to private profits, putting the National Health Service directly in the sights of Donald Trump. And I think we do need to be clear about Donald Trump. And I know that heads of state have to deal with other heads of state in a diplomatic way. But the truth is, if he wasn't President of the United States, people would be very clear about what he is. If anybody, has children, he's exactly what you wouldn't want your child to grow up into. When you go around schools, he's exactly the kind of person that teachers try and prevent our youngsters turning into. He's a personification of greed, self-interest, the belief that might's right, egotism, and a crude venality. He's a bad example to people the world over, and that's why around the world he's not as popular as he thinks he is. That's why around the United States of America he's not as popular as he thinks he is, and the approval ratings are showing that there. But we need to understand him and respond to him in the correct way. And I was saying earlier that the outrageous and appalling things he does and says don't come from nowhere. I mentioned in the National Security Plan, it talks about boosting support for the far right in Europe. That's why he keeps going on about Sadiq Khan and about London. Why on earth is he bothered who the Mayor of London is? Why on earth is he proselytising on immigration levels in our country and on crime rates supposed in London? It's because it is part of that plan. It's quite coherent, actually, even if the way he expresses it sometimes doesn't seem coherent at all. And so we're reaching a situation where the old way of doing things is collapsing. The old reliance on the special relationship is collapsing. More and more people will be interested to know that we don't have an independent nuclear deterrent, and that it depends on the United States of America, in the same way that we don't have an independent foreign policy. Now, I believe in the sovereignty of all countries, including our own. I think our role, our historic role in the world in recent decades of being by and large a junior partner to the United States is a degrading role, and that we can forge a better path. You look at the military interventions that our country has supported in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya. Those interventions were all a disaster and made things where they were bad even worse for people. And then you look at the question as well, there's a real push for an increase in military spending. Now, that is literally and metaphorically not cost-free, in that every pound spent on extra on bombs, bullets and weapons of war is money that could have been spent on the health service, could have been spent on tackling the cost of living crisis. And people need to understand that, whatever people like Paul Mason say on Twitter, that spending money on bombs is one of the least productive things you can do in terms of the economy by definition. And so I welcome the fact that there's a production of the Alternative Defence Review. And it's an important conversation to have, because there are complicated, nuanced debates going on at the moment. I was very troubled to hear I was very troubled by the implications when Keir Starmer said that he'd agreed with Donald Trump that in the event of a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, that UK troops would be sent there. Now, I don't necessarily believe that's popular with people in this country. Maybe we should ask them. And look at the wider context of that. A deal between Russia and Ukraine, I presume, would be by and large determined by Donald Trump's position on what a deal should be. And then you look at his national strategy. He may well like, I think, to see the UK financially and in terms of personnel bog itself down policing a ceasefire deal in mainland Europe, freeing up Donald Trump to pursue his spheres of influence elsewhere in the world. So wherever Donald Trump is suggesting something, I think it's fair to say we need to look at it with caution and question what his real motives are, because his motives aren't the good of everyone in the world. His motives aren't really peace across the board. He's somebody who seems to know the price of everything but the value of nothing. The way he talked about Gaza as a great potential for real estate, and I don't know what's going to happen next, in America's so-called backyard with this reactivation of the so-called Monroe Doctrine. I don't know what's going to happen next in Trump's efforts to take the oil of Venezuela. I don't know what's going to happen next in his attempt to secure regime change in Cuba. We don't know what will happen. But what I do know is if the United States pursues a policy where it starts ousting left-wing governments and progressive governments in that region, either directly or indirectly, there will be resistance to that. And what that would entail would be a response, I think, from the reactionary ruling elites or former ruling elites in those countries, backed up by the United States, a response of real repression. We've seen it before in that region in the 1970s and 1980s, to hold people down, because the progressives in that region who achieved so much despite overwhelming odds over the decades, they're not going to take the removal of and holding down of progressive governments and progressive forces. They're not going to take that lying down. And so in order to maintain a reactionary oligarchy there, the United States and its allies in those countries, in the elites or former elites, would be using repression in order to keep people down. There's a huge human cost to that. So I'll finish on this. We've never lived in a more dangerous world. People are scared, and quite right too. Gone are the days where people could not really think about foreign policy. Gone are the days where people don't feel like they need to watch the international sections in the news. People are scared of the possibility of real war. You see the AUKUS programme as well. You see the push from some people to have an ever more aggressive stance towards China. We need a peaceful world. That doesn't mean we have to agree with every policy of another country. Of course we need to raise concerns that we have in relation to other countries. We need to do so as equals, talking to other people, other people as representatives of sovereign states. So I think the work of CND has never been more important. Young people I meet are scared of a world war happening again. Young people are scared of the threat of the increased military build-up around the world. And we can't have a situation where there's a push for more and more and more military spending here and across Europe, because that will not only lead to a reduction in living standards here, I think it would lead to a world that becomes even more dangerous than it is now. So I'm delighted that Leeds CND has relaunched, and I look forward to supporting you in any way I can in your work going forward.
Thank you very much, Richard. Excellent, thank you. Just really throwing it open to anyone on the floor who wants to comment or ask a question.
I'd like to go back to the question of US bases in the UK. I was at the Lebanese Peace Camp last year, and I learned that officially it's still an RAF base, but actually as soon as you get past the front door, it's entirely controlled by the US Air Force, and they don't have to occupy any of the health and safety, by beginning of any British law within the base. And that might ask the question why there's a discrepancy of numbers of how many US bases are in the UK, because in fact that is a US base but called RAF. So I wondered, is there anything happening, not necessarily the government, in the Labour Party, in Parliament, about disintoning the RAF and the US Air Force in those bases in Britain?
Should we take a few questions at once?
Yeah.
Hello, thanks for all those presentations, really interesting and very informative detail. Since we have an MP with us, I wonder if we could focus a little bit on the role of the Labour Party. And I know you're an independent now, but you're down there.
Not unless that's been on the news. Have I been chucked out again? I might have been.
Well, maybe you could clarify your station.
Yeah, no worries.
And assuming that you're talking to all these people, now, one of the questions is, from today's news, it looks like Summer is finished, and he's kicked out Andy Burgon. So, the big debate will be who's going to follow and what kind of politics will they have. And we can speculate various names, but I'm interested to know what kind of allies have we got in the Labour Party.
Okay.
Because these are radical. The kind of talk you're giving is excellent, but how many people are going to stand up and support it?
Okay, well, I'm very happy to answer that.
In the light of this leadership crisis that they've got. Second point, I appreciate that you really nail it for what it is. It's gangster politics worldwide, and the rise of the big bullies, and it's a really serious historic problem for the whole world. Now, from looking back in history, the answer seems to be that the little guys have got to get together. If Britain stands on its own against Trump and Putin and Xi Jinping and Modi and all these other dictators, we're not going to have much clout. It seems to me there has to be a move towards Europe and to help Europe, to save Europe from the far right as well. But Europe is a tricky topic after Brexit. So how do you see the Labour Party debate?
Great. Splendid.
Thank you.
Get into the politics.
Yeah, definitely. Should we take one more and then I'll answer, then go back for some more questions, if that's all right?
Yeah, that's fine. It's just we're finishing at 8:30.
Oh, well, there's plenty of time. It's only 10 to 8.
So you know.
Yeah.
I've got to get my train.
So this is a
8:45
follow-on,
train.
just a question from the last question. How might this independent foreign policy come about?
Great. So in answer to those questions, I suppose the first question, which I think is very informative, and a lot of people don't know that. And so, is that the case with Menwith Hill as well? It's RAF Menwith Hill, but in fact it's run by the United States. And if you were to ever be invited in, you'd be kind of, or maybe you've been kicked out, you'd be entering kind of, in essence, US territory for all intents and purposes. And that's a really important point that lots of people don't know. And I think that one of the roles that that CND can play is educating people about the reality of these things, because it's quite understandable that most people don't know about some of these arrangements, and most people think our foreign policy and our military arrangements and the nuclear weapons this state has are independent from the United States in a way that they're not. And I think that the desire for a more independent foreign policy is much greater than it has been in my lifetime, because of people's understandably very strong feelings against Donald Trump and what he's doing. It's leading people to question the way foreign policy is done, and you ask, what's been done about that. Not enough is the answer. But this brings me on to the second question, because you said, I'm not an independent. I was chucked out of the Parliamentary Labour Party for 6 months for voting to add scrapping the two-child benefit cap to the government's programme. They then restored the whip to me. But no, I'm a Labour MP, and I'm the secretary of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs, the group in the Labour Party which was set up in 1982 by Tony Benn and others as a kind of left caucus, if you'd like, within the Labour Party. There's around 30 or so left MPs in that group, and we see ourselves really as a buckle between the progressive struggles outside Parliament and what goes on inside Parliament. Now, you talk about who's there to argue for these progressive policies of peace, for example. So I put down an early day motion, which has value, on the USA's military attack on Venezuela. And so that was signed by 40 MPs, most of whom were Labour MPs. But it was also signed, as well as by those Labour MPs, by SNP MPs, Plaid Cymru MPs, Lib Dem, Independent and your party. No, they didn't sign it. So that was 40 MPs, which was really good. There's the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Cuba, who's a member of the Socialist Campaign Group Labour MP, Steve Witherden, an MP from Wales. He has put down a motion. He's put down a motion in relation to Cuba, and that's been signed by your party, Independent, Lib Dem, SNP, and Plaid Cymru and Labour MPs as well. So that is that's good. And when it comes to opposition to Trump in general, obviously it's an even bigger coalition than those kind of 40 MPs that I'm talking about. There is cross-party work in support of progressive positions, whether that be in relation to Palestine, Latin America, or anything else. Now, I, for example, with my Labour colleague from Bradford, your former MP, because you've moved away, because he hasn't, but Imran Hussain, we set up a series of war crime evidence sessions in Parliament, where people who'd been in Gaza, we invited them to Parliament, and in a series of sessions they gave evidence of the war crimes committed by Israel that they'd seen. Now, over 80 MPs from 5 political parties took part in the sessions that I organised with Imran, and we compiled evidence that was provided over their sessions into a big dossier, and myself and Imran went to The Hague and presented that evidence to the International Criminal Court, to the Chief Prosecutor's team, and they accepted that evidence before they made their final deliberations about applying for an arrest warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu and others. We've now set up, myself and Imran, following that, a new group, which is the Parliamentary Working Group on Sanctions on Israel, and we had the second meeting of that the other week. Again, mainly Labour MPs attending, but MPs from other parties as well were there. So there is a core of people who in Parliament who are very pleased to work and very happy to work on progressive issues in relation to peace. I do think we need bigger discussions in Parliament about the question of military spending. So I think the alternative defence review is something. We were going to have a meeting in Parliament, weren't we? And then some big drama occurred, so we couldn't have it. So let's rearrange that. I think that would be very good if this this could be presented, maybe to the Socialist Campaign Group MPs first of all, and maybe broaden it out. Because people are questioning things as they should do at the moment. In terms of your wider questions, you mentioned Europe. Now, of course, we need to have a progressive relationship with Europe, but I would caution against any presumption that Europe is automatically progressive, because of course these things all have to be campaigned for and in a metaphorical sense fought for, don't they? The positions of the European countries aren't always progressive when it comes to foreign policy, but we need to be part of that debate, and part of Spain's done some good things recently in relation to foreign policy, and I think we should be following their lead in relation to that. But like anything, these things shift, don't they? You get progressive movements, reactionary movements, progressive governments, very right-wing governments, and it becomes a bit of a moving feast, but we need to intervene into that. But I do agree that whatever people think of Brexit, Donald Trump has taken the opportunity to try and make us more reliant upon the United States of America. Because of that. And then there was a final question, wasn't there, from over there? I'm looking at my writing.
Into how we're going to
an independent foreign policy come about?
Yeah, well, first of all, there needs to be a big campaign for an independent foreign policy. And CND can play an important role in that. Stop the War can play an important role in that. I think lots of people have become passionate about and interested in foreign policy and the world in a way they weren't necessarily to such an extent before. And you see that with the mass protests for Palestine. So I think we need to feed into that and make a key demand, a more independent foreign policy. Then get that raised in Parliament as well by MPs. Let's have that discussion, but let's have a grassroots campaign for a more independent foreign policy. I think compared to previously, we'll get a lot of support for that necessary and progressive campaign because of the abysmal approach of Donald Trump. So I think we need serious discussions in our communities and in Parliament about that. But it's going to be a big task. We can't just wish an independent foreign policy into existence. There are big, powerful forces who won't be happy. Now, I referred to earlier the opposition that we faced from reactionary elements in the United States and here in relation to what our foreign policy would have been based upon peace if we'd have won the general election, the Labour Party in 2017 and 2019.
Okay, so in relation to US bases in Britain, so basically the British government has leased those British bases to the US. So that's the arrangement. And not only have they done that, but the British government has also brought in exemption orders. That means that US visiting forces, so all the US military bases, they are exempt from British law in relation to nuclear safety. So in relation to like emergency regulations, in relation to radiation, the release of radiation, they are totally exempt from British law on this. Absolutely shocking. And this is partly why the government has this policy of nuclear secrecy. Yeah, how they won't release any information about what's going on at these bases. They do absolutely everything possible to hide that. And CND, we did a legal challenge in relation to RAF Lakenheath, which is where we uncovered the fact that it was actually Ben Wallace in 2021 had brought in this exemption certificate, so that when US nuclear weapons were stationed at Lakenheath, no local council, i.e. Norfolk, Suffolk Council, they would not be informed that those nuclear weapons were here, so therefore they wouldn't be able to prepare any kind of emergency planning evacuation. And this was all in order to keep it secret. Yeah? So the whole thing around the nuclear secrecy for the US, that trumped, British, safety and security. Now, obviously, CND's view is you can't, you can't plan, you can't prepare for a nuclear attack. We're all going to be, nuked. We're all going to be destroyed. But nonetheless, to sort of say that you're not even going to have any kind of evacuation plan, it's really, really horrific. So that's the kind of work that we've been trying to do, to sort of try and expose the horrors in relation to the sort of the nuclear secrecy, which is about trying to stop people from understanding the real dangers of these military bases. But also, it totally undermines British sovereignty. There are war crimes being committed by these bases. In terms of, we know that RAF Marham, which I'd really encourage people to join our demonstration there on the 28th of February. So that base is completely complicit in the genocide being carried out by Israel. It is a hub for the F-35A fighter jets, and we know that F-35A parts made by British arms companies have been shipped directly to Israel from that base. So completely complicit in genocide. So this is just an example of what's happening. So it's absolutely critical that we are putting the spotlights on these bases, which is why I'm saying it's so important that we have protests there, because it's a physical kind of manifestation of the incontrovertible evidence of this complicity. So please, come along and join us at RAF Marham, which is in Norfolk, on the 28th of February. So that's really important. In relation to, the sort of the leadership crisis within the Labour Party. I mean, it's, you know, obviously it's in complete collapse because, you know, you've got a Labour leadership that's working completely against the interests of working people, and, you know, and you've got people like Richard Burgon who are working really hard, you know, in a completely different direction. And I think that, you know, the reason why the Labour Party is in complete collapse is because it is not delivering what it kind of promised. No increases in people's living standards, and just, you know, dragging us, you know, even further towards, you know, this kind of war drive linked to Donald Trump. You know, alternatively, you know, let's look at, like, you know, the leadership of the Greens now under Zach Polanski, you know, and look at the polling. I mean, it just shows you the real catastrophe that took place within the Labour Party when it had a leadership that was, you know, actually taking a position that supported the interests of the vast majority of the population and wanted a kind of independent foreign policy that was based on international law, etc., etc. So, yeah, but I think, you know, it's totally understandable that people are trying to fight within the Labour Party to shift that. That's really, really important. But also it's important that, you know, we see that people within different parties as allies, you know, and we don't kind of have this tribal approach. So I think, you know, it's really great, you know, that if you have Green MPs, you know, working with Labour MPs and independents, that's, you know, that's really, really important in terms of sort of strengthening what we're trying to do. And then in relation to a sort of, you know, independent foreign policy, completely, it's absolutely critical we start at the grassroots with this. You know, so we need to be having debates in local communities, you know, up and down the country. That's what we've got to do. And I would say that we are pushing at an open door here. You know, as I was saying, in relation to, like, the fiasco, the catastrophe that is Donald Trump, means that there's a great, you know, there's a much more of an opportunity to be having those debates about the kind of independent foreign policy that we want. And as I say, you know, because of the, you know, the crises that we're facing in relation to, you know, real threat of war, you know, climate change, you know, austerity, we can really, really sort of push that. So I think that it'd be great to sort of discuss more in terms of, you know, doing that kind of local work, but then how we can link that up in terms of, you know, parliamentary work, you know, how we would possibly kind of have a debate on that. I think that's very important. And then just in relation to Europe, I mean, I think that what we're seeing is, you know, this is, you've got kind of a political crisis going on in Europe, haven't you, where political leaderships are just doing what Trump wants, you know, massively increasing their military spending, and this is causing, you know, huge economic pain and crises for those populations, and that is causing massive political crises across Europe, and why that's partly why you're seeing such a huge increase in the far right. So, you know, and I totally agree with what Richard was saying in terms of, you know, Trump is basically just kind of wanting to have greater influence in the US, but it's also completely about US economic interests, isn't it? That's really what's going on here. So it's really about, when you look at, you know, economies like Germany that previously were very, you know, reliant on Russian gas, you know, they are now buying their gas from the US at a much higher rate. Gas that has been fracked and then is then being, you know, transported, you know, thousands of miles across the world. Very, you know, very bad for the sort of the, you know, for the climate, in terms of climate breakdown. But that's the kind of thing that's going on in Europe now. It is all about, again, like America first. This is just like, what can Trump do to, you know, increase the economic sort of prosperity for the US, and of course that is against the interests of the entire world, which is why, you know, we have a world order that is creating these crises, and why that has to change. I totally agree with Richard in terms of, we need a new world order, don't we, that's based on global cooperation and equality and international law, because this one is giving us genocide, the threat of nuclear war, you know, climate breakdown, rise of the far right. You know, that cannot continue. But I think that's why so many people are now prepared to challenge that, and they want to challenge it, and they do want to, you know, we need a new world, don't we?
And just to come back on that point about cross-party work, I think it's important. I mean, every political party, virtually, is a contested space where people have different visions of things. But you know, and I speak as somebody who's, you know, organised cross-party work on Gaza, who's done cross-party work on Venezuela and Cuba and other issues. You know, the mathematical factor, however, is at the moment the biggest group of left MPs happen to be Labour MPs. You know, you've got 4 Green MPs, you've got 5 independent stroke your party MPs, you've got, you know, the Plaid Cymru MPs, 9 SNP MPs who have different views on different things. But there is still, as I say, about 30 Labour MPs who are firmly on the left, in that they're in the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs and have therefore an anti-imperialist foreign policy as part of their as part of our kind of political view and anti-war policy, pro-peace approach. And then you've got other layers as well of many other Labour MPs who, on the big issues of Gaza, on the big issues in relation to Trump, will take the right position. So I fully support, you know, cross-party working, but at the same time I understand that, you know, people, you know, quite rightly are angry at the positions you know, that Keir Starmer has taken on various things, including on Israel's genocide in Gaza. But I think it's important not to write off the part that the role that the Labour left has to play in a kind of national coalition for peace and progressive politics.
First thing I want to say is thanks for speaking up on sort of how important it is for young people to voice their opinions, and also you know, raising concern for, because at the end of the day it is our future that is being affected. I think what I've noticed as a university student since the Labour Party come into power in Parliament is this sort of lack of trust, especially in relation to Trump and his actions, as well as the genocide going on in Gaza, which I think has led to an increased amount of young people going towards more extremist parties, like more left, you know, to Green, and also reform at the same time. So I guess my question would kind of be, if you were in charge, Richard, how do you think Labour could regain the trust of young people? Because I think it's extremely crucial.
Okay.
Can you pop me?
Sorry about that, guys. I spent the past few weeks preparing the agenda for Green Party Spring Conference, and we produced the final version a couple of days ago. As you'd expect, there's motions on Palestine as well as Venezuela, Sudan, Ukraine, but we also have motions on leaving NATO, and it's not something that's been clearly addressed yet, and whether leaving NATO is a significant part of working for peace within this country and within Europe.
But it has wider implications. You talk about the Golden Dome, which is a kind of modern version of Star Wars, under the presumption that it's not going to work, so where the hell are they doing it? And then you say, well, it's actually just to feed the financial aspect. I think there's actually something much worse than that, and that is that what you have since the end of the Second World War is big technological projects.
Cheers, mate.
And the massive development of weaponry, and the type of weaponry, ending up now with drones, AI, which is making the whole world extremely unstable and very, very dangerous. The whole thing could unravel simply because of the speed with which the technology seems to be advancing. I go into schools and talk about nuclear weapons, and I say, how many countries in the world have nuclear weapons, possess nuclear weapons? Then we have the number, and it's 9. And I say, if on the more sophisticated things I say, 196 countries are possessed by nuclear weapons. It's got its own internal dynamic, and the same with all the technological advances that are taking place, whether it's Star Wars. Even if it doesn't work, you're actually getting advances in all other areas just by doing research. So you have hypersonic missiles, you have all the satellites, you have all this, and even so-called benign projects, Hubble Space Station, or whatever it is, all that is developing the technology for modern warfare, which is advancing at a phenomenally dangerous rate.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, that's what
young people. I mean, as I say, sometimes we've been at meetings where people are, where are the young people? They're not here, they're not doing anything, and I'm like, that's totally untrue. As I said, young people are like phenomenally active. Completely, understand the kind of the political dynamics and are working really hard. And I think for us, it's about supporting them. I've already said the huge amount of work that's been done in universities. I think this whole thing around trust, obviously, you know what I mean? You've got a leadership, unfortunately, a government in Britain, under a Labour government, which has just completely lied, come to power and then totally lied and U-turned and all that sort of stuff. And that's not, that's not a new thing. You know what I mean? Boris Johnson, do you know what I mean? It was really, really clear that like this whole idea about truth and integrity, just sort of gone out the window. So it's completely understandable that young people, don't feel that they have trust in political leaders. But obviously, it's incredibly concerning if young people are, turning to reform. And that's why it's so important to challenge the racism and the lies of the far right. This whole thing about like they position themselves as being sort of anti-establishment, and they are there to sort of support the working class, whereas of course they're not. They are billionaires and etc. We know all this. So I think, but it is absolutely critical. I mean, CND totally understands the link between the rise of the far right and the war drive. So for instance, we know that like part of like what Starmer has been doing is to scapegoat refugees. Say, look, this is the problem. The problem are the refugees, it's the small boats, not our economic policies that are making you poorer and more insecure, okay? And part of that is because they've made the decision to massively increase military spending at the expense of public services. So that's really, really critical. But also this whole thing around, sort of the patriotic kind of militarism that we see. We should be proud of having nuclear weapons. Young people should be going into the industry and they should be making nuclear weapons and they should be, working on the submarines and all of this kind of stuff, which is absolutely obscene. When you look at the levels of abuse within the army, but also, within the Navy, there are some really horrific, reports and evidence of abuse, systematic abuse, torture that take place on these nuclear submarines, which now, because of the crisis in terms of the aging of these nuclear submarines, these patrols can be lasting for 9 months. So you're having people on board these submarines for that length of time. Anyway, so, it's really important that we expose all of this. This is complete lies about caring about young people, etc. And this is, again, why it's so important, providing alternatives. We have the solutions. We want a future where young people are working in, the green industries. You know what I mean? We can have people who are very, intelligent, brilliantly skilled engineers who are working on developing, green alternatives. I mean, to talk about like global cooperation, I think that like what China is doing in relation to the green transition and energy transition is transforming the world. I mean, they are really providing the solutions to the climate crisis. They are the work that they've done, the investment that they've done, the technological advances that they have made is making green energy and energy transition available to countries that never would have been able to afford it because of all the work that they've done. And I think this sort of stuff is really important, and we should be talking about this because this is a kind of hopeful alternative that is possible. possible and that we should be arguing for. Then in terms of the Green Party leaving NATO, I mean, absolutely critical. I mean, CND's like been opposed to, NATO since 1960, and this is partly because actually of what NATO forces NATO states to do, yeah? So, for instance, this whole thing about like it's a defensive alliance, and all these countries, they really want to have US bases on their soil. This is complete rubbish. Lots of countries that have NATO bases, that have US nuclear weapons, have been campaigning for decades to try and get rid of those bases. Belgium, Germany, they've been trying really, really hard because they totally understand that it puts them on the nuclear front line. In the event of a war between the US and whoever, NATO and whoever, they will be on the nuclear front line. But of course we know that it completely impacts economic policy. This whole thing around NATO pushing for NATO states to increase their military spending by 5%, that obviously has a huge impact on then the economic decisions that are being made by these other countries. So I think it's really, really important that we support that. I think it's really brilliant that the Green Party are having that discussion, and CND is totally backing them and completely supporting them.
Great.
You don't need it, do you?
I don't think so. So, thanks for those questions. In relation to our young comrade at the back, thanks for raising that. And a lack of trust isn't a surprise. Well, what can be done to regain the trust of young people, or people in general? Well, the first thing to do is to listen, because I think not enough of that goes on, that politicians need to listen to young people, but then they need to act on that. Not one of these things where the politician kind of sits there, nods and looks upset, and then nothing happens. So, for example, now I know that all young people aren't students, but student debt is a huge issue that starts when you're young, but it seems to trail you for the rest of your life. And I think we really need to look at the issue of finding ways to write off student debt, because the whole student debt system is absolutely obscene in my view. But ultimately, young people are facing a situation where things that were taken maybe for granted by previous generations can no longer be taken for granted. There was always this idea, wasn't it, that your kids will have a better standard of living, or have more opportunities than you did, and now that's gone. And you see, the proliferation of insecure work. You see the proliferation of low-wage jobs, the housing crisis. Whether that be in terms of affording a mortgage, affording rent, or being able to get a council house. And all of these things need addressing. But, of course, one of the ways to gain trust is by, when you say you're going to do something, do it. And that seems to me to be really important. And I do think that people felt, didn't they, young people and the people, that when we finally got the Tories out, when we got a Labour government in, people did feel a sense of hope. And people do feel that the trust they had that change would be delivered. They feel that trust has been betrayed. People feel let down. But of course, we can't presume, as some may do, that young people are automatically progressive. I mean, no people are automatically progressive. There's a constant struggle and a constant battle of ideas. And as you mentioned yourself, reform. And we need to be vigilant against that. And that's why things like the national demonstration against the far right on the 28th of March by Together is so important. I'm really pleased to be on the steering committee of that initiative. I think that's really important, because the far right are emboldened, and it's no wonder. They're emboldened by... I mean, let's look at it this way. In the past, there wasn't a single far right member of Parliament in this country. There were far right members of the European Parliament, but there were never far right members of the Parliament in Westminster. Now there are. And all the opinion polls show that if there's an election tomorrow, we'd have the first far-right government in our country's history. Now, we've had right-wing governments before. We've had very far-right governments before. We've never had a far-right government in this country before. We will end up, if there's an election tomorrow, so all the opinion polls say, with a Donald Trump-style government here, with all that means for minorities, with all that means for our role in the world, with all that means for trade unionists, public services and civil liberties. So we as a mass movement need to offer an alternative to that. And I think a resurgence, I say this as a Labour member, a resurgence of progressive ideas organised for and run within the Labour Party can play an important role in that. Martin, isn't it? Yes. Mentioned the Green Party conference. So when is that?
End of March.
Yeah. So like the Green Party, is a sovereign body, and I look forward to seeing with interest what position they decide upon in relation to NATO, in relation to Venezuela, in relation to Palestine and other issues. I think it'll be very interesting to see what policies arrived on in relation to NATO. I think what Zach Plansky is being saying about it, one of the points he made is you've had a situation now where one NATO country, the USA, has threatened the sovereignty of overtly of another NATO country, Denmark. That's right, isn't it? And so obviously that is a new development. I mean, when Jeremy was leading the Labour Party, it wasn't Labour's policy when we were hoping to get into government to come out of NATO, but there needs to be a big discussion, as I say, about an independent foreign policy, what that looks like. As I said, I believe in all countries, including our own, being sovereign, and to be sovereign, that means that we need to decouple ourselves from the United States in terms of our subservient relationship to the United States militarily and in terms of our foreign policy as well. So I think these discussions about a more independent foreign policy are very welcome, and I look forward to seeing with interest with what is decided. Was there another question?
I think that was it. Covered them. I think. So I just want to.
So what was that? Sorry. Oh yeah, there's a comment there. That was really interesting. Thanks for that. That was really useful. And I think a point you made and about education, because you said you're going into schools, is this. I ask people how many countries they think have nuclear weapons. Lots of people think virtually all countries have nuclear weapons. People presume, and I understand it, because the way it's talked about in this country, you'd think it's as normal as I can't think, what's normal?
First past the post.
Yeah, first past the post. But I don't know, as normal as...
Sliced bread.
As normal as sliced bread, everyone's got a bed. Not everyone, but people have a bed in the house. Every country has nuclear weapons, whatever. And people don't realise there's only a small number of countries in the world that have nuclear weapons. And as soon as you establish that fact with people, actually people's view of the whole thing changes. Because I've had people say to me in discussions, it's like, we don't want to be the odd ones out. We don't want to be like the only major country without nuclear weapons. And then they realise that that's not how it is. And so I think these are really important discussions. And I've not heard that phrase before that you use, which I will pinch, I'll purloin if that's okay, when you said that there are 9 countries with nuclear weapons, but 196 countries that are subject to nuclear weapons.
Are possessed by them.
Possessed by them, okay. Possessed by them. And I think that's a really important point.
Also, if I can add, there's a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And over half the world's countries have actually signed that now. So we are in a minority, in fact, with regard to that.
Yeah. It's 8:30, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've actually, sorry.
Can I just make a very quick point? I think Trump is very committed to peace. Hence why he's the only person to have got the coveted FIFA Peace Prize.
Neil's photos are even better than his jokes. And you can see his photos in the Morning Star on a regular basis.
I hope they are there.
No, that
was good. I think we have to end there. We've come to the end of it's 8:30. I know you've got to catch a train, Sophie. But thank you ever so much for coming, everybody, and thank you, Richard and Sophie, for coming too.
Can I say one last thing? Is that okay?
Yeah. Can I just say though, before you can end it all. Yeah. There's leaflets and booklets and so on at the front. Please take whatever you can, and if you're interested in signing up If you want to know more, please add your name to the list there and we'll be in contact. But over to you
Is this the
then.
relaunch after all?
It is.
Relaunch after all.
So I think it's great that you've had, Sophie, the General Secretary of CND, come to Leeds as part of what needs to be a real resurgence of CND in Leeds. I just wanted to say that this Saturday, I know everything seems to take place in London, but I'm off back to London tomorrow night after my constituency lay pie meeting tomorrow night, because on Saturday there's a Latin American conference in London. Now, I'm not saying people should jump on a train and go down to it, but I think people find it very interesting to see the materials that come out of it and the reports that come out of it, because that's always an important conference, but it's an even more important conference this year in light of the threats that have been made to the sovereignty of Latin American countries like Venezuela and Cuba, Mexico and Colombia. And so I think we really need to link up with that movement as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you very much. Thank you.